Okay. Good evening. It's great to see everybody here. I'm Jeff Munzinger, if we haven't met before, and I'm moderating tonight. And you're going to make it easy for me to moderate, right? So as we get started, does everybody have a clipboard? And on your form there that's on your clipboard, you will notice there's a place where you can write questions for our two panelists, or when the time comes, you can just raise your hand and we'll pass the microphone, and everybody will get to hear your questions. So, okay, let's introduce our two panelists. So with us tonight, Dan Chiles and Steve Stodden. I'm going to give you a little bit of Steve's background first. He is the Associate General Manager of Operations for City Utilities. He joined City Utilities in 1998 as the plant engineer at the James River Power Station and is currently responsible for the natural gas, water, transit, and fleet management areas, which sounds like pretty much everything. Steve serves as chair of the Settlement and Operating Committee for the Energy Authority. He'll have to tell us what that means. And he's past chair of the Missouri Association of Municipal Utilities. Before he joined City Utilities, Steve was a design engineer for the power division of the global engineering and consulting firm Black & Veatch in Overland Park. I think they're headquartered in Overland Park too, aren't they? Yes. And a worldwide company. Steve got his Bachelor of Science degree in Electrical Engineering from Iowa State University, and he's a registered professional engineer in the state of Missouri. He's a graduate of Leadership Springfield and a past president of the Springfield Rotary North Club. And Dan, I think a lot of us know a little bit about Dan. Dan served on city council here at one time in Springfield. He's a business owner. He's a tree farmer. He owns several patents, and he's been involved in things with the Democratic Party here in Greene County. And sometime I hope maybe you can share with this group your presentation on trees. He has a wonderful, really interesting presentation on trees, all about trees, how they grow and what they do for us. So with that, I'm going to hand this mic over. And we're going to hear a little bit about renewable energy, and that mic will work as well. I don't know who wants to go first.
Hey, I think I'm going to be the one to start, and I have a few slides I'm going to show you just to give you a little bit of background for where the utility's at and kind of where it's come from. I don't actually have our electric area anymore, but I grew up in our electric area. So, up until a couple of years ago, I was a power supply person. That's what I dealt with at Black & Veatch. So I've worked on nuclear power plants, I've worked on coal plants, I've worked on combined cycle. The funny thing is I never really worked on renewable projects because when I was really a practicing engineer, renewable projects just weren't that plentiful. And as they started to become economical, I was moving up in management, and that's where we started contracting for some renewables here at City Utilities. But I think it's kind of an interesting evolution to look at. So in 2011, I moved from the power plant to downtown and took over as Associate General Manager for electric supply. In 2011, we were about 85% coal-based. That's right after Southwest 2 came online. We had James River online, so we had all 7 of our coal units online. And we were largely a coal utility. As the electric supply person, that kind of terrified me because we were talking about carbon tax and we were looking at cap and trade and we were looking at what we were going to do with carbon legislation, and we're sitting here as an 85% coal-based utility. And, looking at that, and you started looking at any future of what that looked like, and that was going to be devastating for our customers. So we started looking at that. About the same time you saw natural gas prices starting to decline. And natural gas prices have come down and stayed there forever, which was really a challenge for our older coal plants. But it really kind of forced us to make some changes right about the time that renewables was becoming more affordable. And so it really worked together well, I think, to give us a really diverse portfolio, which you'll kind of see now as we step through these. So if you want to go to the next slide, and then if you want to skip that one, that's our communication slide. This starts in 2014, and so you'll kind of see as we step through this how much change there was. So for years, 8% renewables was really where we were at. About half of that was our hydro allocation. And I know some people debate whether hydro is renewable or not. We include our big hydro as our renewable. So about half of that was our hydro allocation from Southwest Power Administration, and the other half of that was our Smoky Hills wind farm that we entered into a contract in 2008 for 50 megawatts. That was our first foray into any larger scale renewable energy. We had some little pieces before that, but Smoky Hills in 2008 was our first bigger one. And then we didn't really add anything until, for several years, but you can kind of see, at that point we were 77% coal, and really the big change in 2014, I'm going to stand up here for just a minute because I can see it easier. Really the big change in 2014 was we entered what we call the integrated marketplace, and so that was the first few months of the integrated marketplace. That was when we were competitive on the wholesale side. So you'll see that market piece jumped up to 13%. Well, this was just the beginning of that, what that wholesale impact was on our portfolio. If you go to the next slide, you'll see that market piece jumps to 30%. As I said in there, really low natural gas prices. There was a lot of natural gas generation in the Southwest Power Pool footprint. So we bought some very affordable energy off the market, and our coal fell down to 59%. You'll see the renewables tick up just about 1% there. And that 1% is really from the first year of our solar farm. The solar farm in the northeast part of town, which is a 5 megawatt solar farm, started up in 2014. So you're seeing the beginning of that. Didn't have a huge impact, but everything kind of moves you down the road to where you want to get to. If you go to the next slide, that shows 2016, and there you'll see renewables take another tick up, and that is the very first piece of test energy from our Frontier wind farm. So during this time, in 2015, we were really hearing from people that there was some very affordable wind energy out there. So we went out for bid, and I kind of structured the bid saying, we want at least 50 megawatts, but tell us what makes sense. And so we got some bids for some very affordable pricing if we'd take the entire project, which is what we did on Frontier. So we actually took 200 megawatts of wind at that point from a project in Oklahoma. So Smoky Hills is in Kansas, this project's in Oklahoma. And so you'll see the very beginning of that. Really, coal changed a little bit because of the market changes. But if you go to the next slide, then you see the renewables jump up to 29%. That is the first full year of Frontier being in operation. And you see the big impact there. And you see coal continue to be challenged by both the market and renewables, which is kind of an interesting tale. I mean, I don't know. Being the Democratic group, I can probably be a little more frank, but we've talked about trying to save coal. Regulation is not killing coal. Economics is killing coal. And this is all driven by economics. If you flip to the next slide, that is the second full year of Frontier. So what tends to happen on these wind projects is the first year they have to do a ton of maintenance and a lot of checks because they run them for 200 hours, shut them down, check things, run them for 200 hours, shut them down, check things. So your second year, you get a lot more generation. So you see a little bit of a blip up there. But if you go to the next slide, so in 2017, just like we heard in 2015 and 2017, people were coming to us saying, we know you got a lot of wind, but we have even better deals on wind now. And the prices they were throwing around were just astronomically cheap. So we thought, well, we'll put a bid out and see what happens. Well, we got a bid price that we just couldn't say no to. And that was a Diamond Vista farm in Kansas. And so this is the very first year of the operation of Diamond Vista, along with Frontier and Smoky Hills and our other resources. We also have a landfill gas project that's been around for several years. But if you go to the next slide, this is really what the future's looks like. This is with Diamond Vista completely up and running, Frontier completely up and running, Smoky Hills up and running, our landfill gas, our hydro, and our solar project all running together. And what I really like about that is it's a very balanced portfolio. You still have some of your coal backbone that we really kind of need at this point still because of where we're at in the power grid, where we're at in the gas pipeline. We really need something for winter. And we really rely on those coal units still for our winter operation. But we get some very affordable power off the market. And if you ever look at when we buy power off the market, we buy power off the market at night. Wind in Kansas, wind in Oklahoma blows really hard at night. So the off-peak prices at night sometimes go negative. Sometimes they're paying you to take power. And so when that happens, we run all of our coal units down to the absolute minimum load and take as much power as we can because it's so affordable. So largely that market based piece there you see is renewables also. We just can't take credit for that piece in our portfolio because we don't own that piece. So that's kind of an interesting picture of what it looks like. You know, one thing I'll mention too is Southwest Power Pool really kind of leads the nation, really leads the world in integrating renewables together. You know, they just had a record, they had a wind penetration record last April of 67%. So 67% of their power was generated by wind at one time. And in October, they hit a renewable penetration record of 74%. So most of the countries that are talking about integrating renewables or trying to expand to renewables, sometimes they're talking about 20%, 30%. Southwest Power Pool is almost 75%, sometimes renewable. And that's a real challenge. So really, we're kind of part of figuring out how far you can push that. And probably 10 years ago, there was a study done, and I think they said 30% was the limit. If you got above 30% renewable, you were going to, the grid was going to become unstable. Well, you know, we figured out how to get to 75. So you're continuing to push that envelope. But, you know, it's really information that Southwest Power Pool is figuring out as they go that's really going to be kind of used by the world as you move forward with renewables. So it's kind of interesting to be part of that mix, but you can see just, you know, how much our portfolio has changed over the years. You know, it's been dramatic. In the last 10 years, that has been a huge shift for us. But, you know, it's been great. And, you know, part of that, and I don't get into all the details, but of course our James River Power Station's not operating anymore, other than a couple of the gas peaking units there, which, you know, it was, as much as I love that station, I kind of grew up in that station, it was time to move past that station. And so our 2 coal units we have left are both at Southwest Power Station or John Twitty Energy Center. And there are 2 newest ones, the 2 most controlled ones. But anyway, that is kind of the summary of where City Utilities is at. And you let Dan talk or?
So then we'll do some questions.
Okay, we'll do that, yep.
Keep that, you may need.
Okay.
Is that working? Is that working? That's working. Okay. Anybody here ever owned or operated an old car? An old car. I'm talking about a beater, a POS, a clunker, something that's held together by rust and corrosion. So then you know, all of us, now we've joined together in a group, no matter where you came from, your geographic location, your gender, your age, your background, your religious affiliation, the baseball team that you favor, all of us together, one group, united under the single and solitary rule that binds us together when we own and operate an old car, and we all know what that is. The ironclad rule: you cannot ignore the warning lights. You know what I'm talking about. If you've got a brand new car, and the average car in the United States that's new is $35,000, but if you're driving your clunker like I drive down the road, and let's say you got a new car, and that thing goes bust, and it's off the side of the road, somebody's going to drive up and they're going to give you a brand new car because it's under warranty. But if you're driving an old clunker and it goes off the side of the road because you failed to ignore or failed to pay attention to the warning lights, nobody's going to drive up and give you a brand new car. So sure, some of these warning lights are more important than others. I mean, they're all important, but especially the ones that talk about the coolant or the lubrication for your engine. You've really got to pay attention to those lights. And here's an important thing to remember about warning lights. As much as they are important in our lives, they're not emotional and they don't care. They come on and they go off at their own discretion. It's not our privilege to give them emotional content. So here we are on the earth. Now this is a bit of a clunker, right? I mean, it's an old car. It's an old vehicle. It travels still pretty well, 67,000 miles an hour. It's been around for about 4.5 billion years. And in the back seat are 7 billion people. Everybody's got a priority. Everybody's got to get someplace. Everybody needs the transportation to get someplace. So it's a pretty good rig. I mean, you got to admit. But there are a few warning lights going off on this fine old vehicle. So I'm just going to go through a few of them. And if you've been paying attention to the news, you've seen all this. Little warning light. The land is getting hot. Hot to the point that someday, all of this beautiful Midwestern area that we call farmland will be too hot to farm. The ocean is getting hot, which means if you depend on fisheries, which a lot of people do, and the supply that comes from them, then that's in jeopardy. But the ocean is also becoming acidic, which means that the little creatures down the bottom of the food chain that use calcium and other materials to build shells, and they're sort of the plankton that start, and then they build up to the super predators like tuna and everything in between that we like to eat, all of that is at risk if the oceans are too acidic. But in addition to that, the oceans are suffocating, which means that the oxygen level is dropping, which further imperils the ability of creatures large and small to be able to live their normal life. The Arctic is overheating, and you know about this because you've seen the pictures. But this is important because these are the two reservoirs of temperature stability on the country, and we'll talk about that in just a minute, which means that the Arctic ice is melting, and the world's glaciers are melting. So someday soon, you'll be able to go to Glacier Park, and there'll be absolutely no glaciers left for you to look at. The weather's becoming more violent, and this is something that Steve has to deal with, because here he is, a guy that's running a number 2, running a utility, and when the storms get too violent, then it's an issue for him because he's got to provide power for everybody. But the kind of weather disasters and the costs associated with that is simply going up. And you know that because we live in Tornado Alley. It used to be called Tornado Alley, maybe it still is, but you know how the weather seems to have shifted. And now you see tornadoes every place. You see tornadoes in Boston, you see tornadoes in Texas, and you see tornadoes in the southeast. So the weather is obviously changing, and it's changing in a violent sort of way. Welcome to Wendy's. The weather is becoming more extreme, and that's an issue if you're trying to farm. Because if there's one thing you need when you're farming, and I'm a tree farmer, you need water, and you need good weather, and you need stability because you have to be able to plan. And we're experiencing now what we probably regard, and we're not exactly sure, but the 7th great extinction of plants and animals. The others were caused by things like asteroids, or, you know, there's a host of issues that would have caused, in some cases, the 95% extinction of all living things on the earth. But we're going through the 7th one, and this one is caused by humans. And the permafrost is melting. So what that means is they call them drunken trees sometimes. You see them around in pictures of the Soviet Union or of Alaska, for example, where these trees have for thousands of years depended on the stability of frost below the area where their roots are. But when all of that frost goes away, when it all melts, it does two things. It means that you now have impermanence, your foundations for your houses, your roads, your telephone poles, and your trees are all just going crazy. And the second thing that happens, of course, it's releasing methane. This is the stored carbon that was there for thousands of years, and now it's being released into the atmosphere, which is much more potent than CO2. And the world's forests are dying. And as a tree farmer, this is of particular importance to me, because trees can be very long-lived things and extremely handy to have around. A bald cypress, like you might see on a lakefront property in Springfield, will live for 1,800 years. A white oak will live for 800 years. These are long-lived creatures. These are, in some cases, sentient. I mean, there's an argument about that, but they're definitely God's creatures, and they're imperiled. The polar vortex, it used to be that I would do this presentation when people go, middle of winter, it's cold here, and I go, well, one of the reasons is because the polar vortex acts badly. It used to be like a fence. It sort of just kept the cold weather where it belonged, but now, because this has become so hot, the vortex is moving, and that causes extreme weather patterns to come down. So you'll see really weird weather events like we saw just last week, when it was extremely cold on the west side of the United States and it was extremely hot on the east side of the United States. That's because the polar vortex is acting badly. And the sea ice is disappearing. And that may be an issue for polar bears, but it's a bigger issue for us because of the albedo. And so what that is a measurement of reflectivity. So when you have an ice cap, it's white, and the sun shines on it, and it bounces back. So on an overheating planet, that's a very good thing. We don't want too much energy. We want to be able to bounce that energy back to the atmosphere or back to space. But when it gets dark, because the ice is melted and now the energy is hitting the dark blue colors, it means it's absorbing significantly more amount of energy. And the dead zones are growing. And this, of course, is a consequence of growing all soy and corn and soybeans in Iowa and Missouri and other places, but it's also a consequence of overheating. And so you see this malicious recipe being concocted where you dump all the nitrates and all the overflow from fertilizing practices that goes down into the Mississippi, and then it hits hot water, and then it turns out that the little critters extract all of the oxygen, and that means that there's no oxygen left for the fish to grow. So the fishermen who are dependent on growing fish and catching fish and crawdads and such are simply out of luck. And the insects are disappearing, and this is sad. In Germany, they have measured a 75% reduction in the number of flying insects in their country. And so, I mean, like, if you're old like me, you remember those days before air conditioning. You get in the family car, and you're going someplace, and the dad was driving too fast, probably, and the only way to keep the car really livable was rolled all the windows down. We called it the 460 air conditioning system. But you remember when you got to the destination, what your windshield looked like? You remember those days? It would be covered with insects. And so that's when my dad would stop at the grocery store and he'd buy a bottle of Coca-Cola, because that's a pretty good use for a bottle of Coca-Cola. You pour it right on the windshield, and something about, Steve's so smart, he probably knows, but it's something about the acidic content of the Coca-Cola would take the bugs away, and you could run the wipers, and then you could see again. But those days are gone. I mean, I just never see those sort of insects happening, and I think part of the reason is that they've done a better job of measuring the loss of insects in Germany than we have, but we're probably experiencing the same thing, except when it comes to mosquitoes. Because mosquitoes are now expanding their range, and we hear these periodically horrible reports about Zika viruses and stuff, and that's the reason. Because these are opportunistic little creatures, and even though there's fewer of them, they're more aggressive now, and they have more places to bite people. And this is sad, too. The birds are disappearing. So in the last 30 years, and this report just came out just 2 weeks ago, there's been a 30% reduction in the number of birds in North America. Why? Well, for one reason, because the insects are gone, and that's what most of them feed on. But at the same time, when the trees are gone, and when we spray these pesticides in all directions, it's like Silent Spring. You know, you can't just willy-nilly spray pesticides and noxious chemicals in all directions and hope that there isn't an impact, because there absolutely is. So what does it mean when the birds disappear? It's like one of those intangible things that you just miss when you were a kid. You miss seeing them, and you're going to miss them again. You kind of wish your kids could have had the same experience that you had. And of course, the fresh water is drying up, and that's another one of Steve's responsibilities. He's got to think about that future. I mean, we just keep drilling wells, and we think that the water supply is infinite, but it's not. And so, as you heat up the land, and as you pump the Ogallala Aquifer in the Middle East, you're just going to be fighting for water, like Mark Twain said, "Whiskey's for drinking and water's for fighting." And this is something that the Pentagon, in their wisdom, said back in 2014. Lizzie, who was the president back then? Somebody was paying attention, because they said, climate change requires immediate action. Why? Because climate change means international instability. And we've seen it. Look what happened in Syria. I mean, part of that is political insurrection, but a lot of that is the fact that it's so hot over there. The crops are failing. The farmers have had to leave their farms, and where they're going? To the urban areas. And the urban areas become saturated, become political hotspots. The dictators over there say, we don't need you, and that's why you have the immigrations into Europe. But it's going to get worse. And this is my favorite slide. All right, National Geographic, that's a pretty impressive organization. If you just look at this map, it kind of looks like the United States. It does. I mean, because you can see the familiar outline, you can kind of see the shape, but if you look closely, you will see that this is a map that the National Geographic drew when the ice caps melt. And the ice caps will melt. You can try this yourself. You can go home tonight in a relatively warm room, and you can put a glass of water and a bunch of ice in it on your table, and sooner or later that ice is all going to melt. If the temperature of the planet is going up, the ice caps will melt. What happens when that happens? You get seawater rise. And so, just to point out the obvious, you're going to lose a lot of cities here that have to go someplace because there's no longer steady ground for them to be on. It's inundated. But the one thing I want to point out to you, in case it's not obvious, see this little thing here? Yeah, that is the Mississippi River Valley. It's a fairly low area, and when the oceans rise, guess what happens? Welcome to Cape Girardeau. And this is a tip I'm going to pass along, and it's not going to cost you a nickel. Take all of your investment savings, forget about those stocks and bonds, who needs that, and just go right up to Cape Girardeau and buy lakefront, oceanfront property real cheap right now. And I'm not the first person to think of this. It so happens Donald Trump is building a hotel on beachfront property in Cape Girardeau. Now, maybe you thought the conspiracy theories and rumors get started by themselves. They don't. So let's get that social media working. By tonight, I want to see that rumor in the New York Times or Fox News. Okay, here's the big one. You're driving your car along. These warning lights are going off. You've seen them before. You got to get someplace. You don't have a lot of money to fix your car. Then this light goes off. Yeah, that's the oil light. That means you no longer have lubrication to all those thousands of little moving parts. And what do you think is going to happen to your car? Nothing good. So this is the rating as of May 12 of 2019 from the Mauna Loa station, where they've been measuring CO2 levels in the atmosphere since 1960. You heard Al Gore talk about it. It's going up and up and up. You see the seasonal variation? That has to do with trees. Trees absorb carbon, plants do, and then they release it. So that's what the little jiggly line means. But the trend line is ominous. That's right. Hit a record high in May. But look, let's give carbon the credit that it deserves, and I think Steve made a reference to it. Everything that we have here today, the seats you sit in are some kind of polyester plastic. This table is plastic. This thing is made out of plastic, which is from carbon. It's from natural gas. It's from petrochemicals. Our civilization, everything that we have today that we call important or necessary has been aided and associated by the use of carbon. So we got to give the thing credit. So let's do a thought experiment. This is a civilization question. Let's say we're here today, right? We're here. But let's say we could go back 5,000 years. And at that point, we're looking at a civilization that's got a lot of interesting things going on, like agriculture and writing and religion. I mean, humans are starting to get their act together. And let's make a big, bold assumption that we are going to go 5,000 years into the future. And at that point, you're going to be talking to your grandson who's got a school assignment, and that's got to be turned in on Monday. Of course, it's Sunday. And he comes to you and he says, my job, the teacher told me I had to describe the entire history of carbon consumption by the human race, and I got to turn it in tomorrow. I got to show the whole discovery of carbon. I got to show the exhaustion of carbon. I got to show the use of carbon. And then I got to show how carbon, we burned it all and it's all gone now. What would that look like on a graph? Yeah, a spike. It's just a spike, friends. That's what it is. I mean, it's not that there's unlimited amounts of carbon. People still have carbon in museums. You can drive your car someday and go look at the carbon, but we're burning it. So the good thing is we're right here. We always wanted to be on top, all 7 billion of us riding right on top. Here's my question for you, though. My question for you and your friends and your grandchildren and everybody that might be listening to you is, do we have to burn it all at one time? I mean, do we really? Is that necessary, that we burn all of that carbon all at the same time? And here's the reason I asked the question. As Al Gore said in his program, if you had a globe, say you had something like the Earth, and it was big enough that I could just hold it right in front of you, and you wanted to represent what the atmosphere looked like on the outside of that globe, you know what you would do? You take a paintbrush and a little layer of varnish. And one layer of varnish around the globe this big would accurately represent the scale version of the atmosphere that's above our heads. You know, you look in the sky and it looks blue, you think that goes on forever, but it doesn't. It's a relatively thin layer. And when you're dumping in that much carbon from that spike every year into the atmosphere, nothing good can come out of it. And so that's what we're seeing. I mean, really, people can contest the science all day long, but it's really simple physics. I mean, you know, Steve here being an engineer, he probably had that in beginning classes. If you have a closed loop system and you add energy to it, guess what's going to happen? The temperatures are going to rise. And your Aunt Edna, she did the same thing with her oven. you put things in an oven, you turn up the temperature, you're going to see an effect. So here we are. This old beater, this old planet of ours, 7 billion people in the back seat, and warning lights. And not just a few. I mean, all I've done is just sort of pick the ones out of the headlines. You could read about these. One I saw the other day that I forgot to put in, I thought was so cool. Qatar, it's sometimes spelled Qatar. It's this crazy little small Mideastern country that's rich in petroleum, and they're going to have an Olympic event there in the future, and they have a World Cup soccer. World Cup soccer. So they're building 12 giant World Cup soccer stadiums. You know what they're doing with them? These outdoor stadiums? They're air conditioning them. Just because they air condition their outdoor restaurants and their outdoor cafes, they air condition their outdoor sidewalks because it's 116 degrees in Qatar. And the point of the article was that it's going to be 116 degrees here. And can we burn carbon to stop the warming that we're feeling? Yeah, and by the way, the warning lights don't care. There's no reason to get too emotional about this. The warning lights are just there. Okay, so sometimes I think it's as simple as this. I really think that people like us that understand old cars, and the reason why you drive an old car is because they're economical and they get you where you need to go. If the people that are buying and selling us on the idea of climate denialism just drove old cars, they'd have a different perspective, don't you think? That's my theory. Now I ask the question. All of us. Why are we boiling ourselves like a frog 1 degree at a time? Why do we feel fine? You're here, and I treasure your presence because you're here, but you know who's not here? Everybody else. What do they think? Do they think everything's okay? Yeah, most people think, oh, it's just somebody else's problem. And here's the issue, because up to this date, and remember, we knew that carbon trapped heat in the 1700s because they were studying gases, and they observed one of its effects was that it traps gases. But so the scientists, bless their little hearts, have been studying this subject at some length, but are they moving the needle? All of these systematic studies, all the brains, all the Nobel laureates, all the thousands of millions, all of them with a handful exception of people paid for by the oil companies, are all giving us the same information. The planet is warming, we have to do something. But now I think the scientists are studying the wrong thing. Yeah, now it's time to study the human brain to find out why we're not doing more. So why do we ignore climate change? Well, there are a few reasons, and we're all going to relate to this, okay? Distant threats don't concern us, right? It's in the future. That's not my problem right now. Right now, I got to get to my doctor's appointment. Payday's on Friday, my kid's crying, I got responsibilities. We have no clearly defined enemy. So you remember Pogo? He said, I have met the enemy and he is us. That sort of idea. But, it's hard to say. Like, who do you blame? Blame me. Yeah, because I drove here. You guys drove here too. So blame yourselves. Blame everybody. The fact that we don't have, like a World War II, those are the bad guys and we're the good guys, that's hard to accept. Weakly defined, we don't know what the consequences are. We can say Glacier Park's not going to have any glaciers anymore, but what is it going to mean for you personally? I don't know. And most of us aren't talking about it. Did you guys see the Democratic debate the other night? How many hours long was it? Did they ask a single question on global warming? No. Nope. And science has morphed into politics, and this is a shame. Because really, in politics, we treasure our democracy, and that's how we get things done. But at the same time, there should be some objectivity someplace. We'd like to think science represents that. And I'll pass on one other idea to you. The tragedy of the commons. Everybody familiar with this? This is an old concept, and here's what it means. Old New England towns used to have a place in common where you could bring your sheep or your cows. It has a carrying capacity. Let's call it 100. So 100 cows through thick and thin, good weather, bad weather, rains, snowstorms, whatever, that thing can support 100 cows and do it sustainably. Over time, it's got 100 cows. But suppose one nefarious person in the dead of night, when no one's paying attention, slips another sheep or another cow into it. Now you've got a 101. And suppose people aren't paying enough attention, it's like 100, you know, who's paying attention to 101? Who's the winner? The winner is the guy that slipped in the cow or the sheep, because now he didn't pay anything, and until someone catches him, he gets the free use of this thing. But you know what it's caused? It's caused the inevitable decline for the other 100, because it's got a carrying capacity of 100. You add 101 and the thing goes into decline. Everybody suffers. Everybody loses except for that one person. My point. Whoever's buying lakefront, oceanfront property in Cape Girardeau right now is going to be the winner. There's going to be winners and losers in this climate discussion. But the commons, that's us. That's all of us together. We are the ones that will suffer while the handful benefit. It's called the tragedy of the commons. You see it in overfishing. Okay, so like, if we don't set limits on the number of cod that you can catch off the east coast of the United States, the cod inevitably decline and you can't buy them anymore. So look, in terms of psychology, Robert Cialdini has done amazing work over the years to figure out what motivates people to do the right thing for the environment. Why should people care? He studied this subject. He asked some very logical questions and did extensive surveys. They could save money. That's a darn good reason. Who doesn't want to save money? Steve's saving money. I mean, he used to be buying coal, but it turns out he can buy wind for a lot less money. He's smart. You could save the planet. In case you have kids or grandkids, it's not a bad thing. You're going to give them the same good life that we had. You could be socially responsible. We go to church. We pay attention to the laws. We try to be right with our neighbors and our friends. That's being socially responsible. Sorry, none of that works. I mean, we talk about it, but none of that motivates people to get out of their chair and do something about the environment. Large or small, whatever your capability is, large or small, none of these work. You know what works? And here's the good news. One thing does work. One tactic, one strategy, over and over, time and again, works to convince people that they should get out of their chair and do something about improving the environment. Your neighbors are doing it. And you know what's cool about that? That's called grassroots organizing. Grassroots. You do something in your house, the neighbor leans over the fence and he goes, oh my gosh, what are you doing? And you explain it, and then he goes, okay, that's cool, I get it, I understand it. That is the number one motivator for people to do the right thing. And look, it's working. Utility scale photovoltaic is happening. There's a lot of it being installed. I'm so proud of Steve and CU. I mean, really. These guys are great. I was on the CU board when it was during the coal age, and they have made a dramatic reversal. And like he said, it's economics, which is great. It's just cheaper. So look, let's talk about this. You see this map? This shows where the best solar is. You can see it clearly. It's right down here. There's a thing called community solar. So let's say any of you don't have enough money, or maybe your roof's in the wrong direction. Maybe you got big trees you don't want to lose. You don't want to put solar on your house. And Steve, he'd probably make the same case for you. He'd go, look, why do that? I'm going to sell you solar. I'm going to sell you wind. But there's a third alternative to that. It's called community solar. So in those places where it's in your interest, you get together with your neighbors. You buy a vacant lot from the city, you find some place that's available, you find some opportunity, a commercial lot, and maybe it's 5 of you, maybe it's 10 of you, maybe it's 100 of you. But you get together to create a solar asset that you operate and you control. What is the one state in America that's leading in putting up community solar because it is wildly popular? People have embraced it. I finally get to do something for the planet. I can't afford to put solar on my house. It doesn't work. But I'm part of a group. My 5 neighbors are going together. What is the one state that has pulled this off and have made amazing progress? Minnesota. Those nice people in Minnesota. But you notice that there's no real connection between solar potential and Minnesota. It's all down here. It's a matter of your mind. It's in your mind. You think that this is cool, you do it, and the people of Minnesota have embraced it. And before I leave this slide, I will point out to you, community solar in Missouri is illegal. Yeah, I'm the chairman of this organization called Renew Missouri, and we are working to work with utilities to try and find a way that and in fact, in Minnesota, they coordinate with utilities to put in community solar. So it's a win for everybody. But it's one of those little struggles we're working through right now to try and get legislation that would let people make their own decision. I'm in love with this map, and so is Steve. I'm just telling you. This map here, you see that purple band? That is the wind potential right next to us. We are so lucky because
That's all Southwest Power Pool.
yeah,
That whole band is Southwest Power Pool that we're in.
that's right. They're in Southwest Power Pool, and they are the beneficiaries of it because there's guys out there developing wind generators that would love to sell power to Steve, and they would love to be selling power to Chicago if they can get transmission lines through there. So that's just another issue. But I mean, look at Saudi Arabia. Okay, you could live like a king for the next 100 years, and then all that oil's gone. And in geological times, 100 years is nothing. It's a blink. So when that oil is gone, they're completely out of luck. They're back to living in sand. But this is not going away. In fact, it's easy to call this, we are the Saudi Arabia of wind. It's an astonishing resource, and it's right next door. I just threw this in because I think it's kind of cool. I mean, you think the Earth is turning, so you get this westerly winds that prevail, but it's not always the case. Depending on the season, sometimes they get kind of odd. And so this was a map that shows the way the wind blows. That was cool. Oh, bright side to this, I don't mean to leave everybody depressed. I mean, really, the best side of climate change, global warming might be that, and Steve knows this because he's a physicist, but when you add energy to a closed system, you get kinetic energy, and it's known as wind. So the warmer we make the planet, the more the wind blows, which is good for us. And here's the giant elephant in the room. We don't want to get too technical about this. We just want to remind everybody that the best thing you can do is energy efficiency. Turn down your water heater and make sure that you've got to strip around your doors and make sure you've got plenty of insulation. I mean, it's not that hard. We can do this together as a group, right? I mean, the red line is that you do nothing, and everything just gets worse and worse and worse, and then you have to answer to your children and explain to them why you weren't doing anything. But all these other things are really cool, and they're going to be part of the solution, okay? You got to have all of those things together to make it work. A little splash of renewables, a little splash of nuclear, some natural gas and efficiency, and if we do all that, the cool thing is all those things take jobs. So you're wondering what my nephew, my daughter, my kids, what are they going to do for jobs? There's an answer right there. And a new national grid, which will make everybody's heart beat faster if you're stuck in Chicago trying to buy cheap energy, we need to work on that. And that is something that my little organization, Renew Missouri, works on every single day to try and build a transmission infrastructure to get the stranded energy from Kansas and that band you saw there into the major population centers. That has got to happen. And people go, well, that's expensive. Yes, that's expensive. That's $75 to $100 billion estimated cost, and it's probably a lot higher now because that number's a little bit old. But do we really think that's expensive? I mean, sometimes you think something's expensive, but you haven't looked at this thing over here on the scale. Yeah, let's just talk about what's going to happen to your taxes and to mine when the ocean levels rise, which they are, and when they engulf these major American cities, which have to be moved, because they're no different than you and me. You probably have relatives in these cities. I do. All of these cities, the streets, the intersections, the schools, the libraries, the water treatment plants, the utilities, all that's got to be moved. And so I just stuck Indiana in there because how do you know how far are you supposed to go to move Philadelphia? You got to go someplace. The cost will be astronomical, and that's so I'm a Democrat. But if you think like a libertarian, which is painful, but every once in a while you go, well, just assign the real cost. Assign the real cost of burning coal, which means moving American cities, and then start to think about how much coal really costs. So a couple slides ago, we saw how the military was going, we need to take action right now. Part of that voice is coming from the Navy, because think about this. They have Navy bases all over the world. Every single American naval base will have to be moved when the ocean levels rise. Who's going to pay for that? The Germans, being industrious, calculating, have this thing they call the graph. All right, here we are, 2019. Here's where we got to get. We got 23 years to get to what they call the breakover point. The breakover point looks like this. Renewables finally overcome the objections, overcome the problems, the technical issues. We start to assign the real cost of burning fossil fuels, and all of those fossil fuel-driven industries start to decline, and all of the renewable energies start to increase. In 23 years, they estimate we can do that. How do we get there? Can we be mature adults for the next 23 years until the technology, or do we just have to burn all that coal for 23 years? Any ideas? Yeah, it's called a carbon tax, and it's a bad word, isn't it? I mean, tax, no one wants to hear about a tax, but my point is, just like I made, you have to assign real costs if you want to know the value of something. What does it really cost to burn coal? And if we could just figure that out, and we said, all right, the real cost of burning coal is not this, but it's this. Everybody has to pay if you want to burn coal, or drive a car, or get a swift kick in the butt. So here's a swift kick in the butt. You know how, I mean, I hate PowerPoint presentations that put a lot of words up there, you know, it's so irritating. Just pick one. Yeah, just pick one and go, okay, how much does that cost? You want to build cities on Mars? I mean, you want to abandon Florida? What do these things really cost? That has to be the question that we're going to face. Or carbon tax. I'm going to wind this thing up. I was so proud of the Pope. Smart guy. Here's what he said. Climate change is scientific reality. It took a Pope to tell us that? Yeah, it did. And here's what else he said. We have a responsibility to do something about it. He's absolutely right. He's talking to the Dalai Lama. The two of them are getting together, big brains. Is anybody listening? And this is my final slide. So my dad was a fighter pilot in World War II, and my mom grew up on an impoverished farm north of here. Neither went to college. But they built this great life for them and their kids. And then Tom Brokaw wrote this book. Remember that? It was several years ago. And he called the people of that generation the greatest generation. And I think he really touched a nerve in American life, because he brought to our attention the struggles and the suffering and the care, you know, the cooperation, the fighting of the World War II that basically saved our civilization. Right? And I think he's appropriate there. And I want you to put this picture in your mind. Baby boomer, lots of us, millions of us, look to the day that baby boomers have become such a big responsibility to the culture that we are lined up wheelchair to wheelchair in abandoned Sears buildings, abandoned malls, with only little aisles between us as the undereducated children go back and forth with our pharmaceuticals, at which point we hope that we have a decent education system so they can read the labels and give us the right pharmaceuticals. There we are, by the thousands. They turn the lights down low, we have big screen TVs. And when those kids are sitting in their break room and they're talking about our generation, what are they going to call us? Are they going to call us the greatest generation? Or are they going to call us the jerk generation? Are they going to say, these millions of people in wheelchairs in these dark old Sears buildings, stuck together, they did the right thing? Time is not over yet. We're still here. You know, age 66. We're still here. We're still making a difference. We've got to think about that difference that we can make in the time we have left. And thank you. Thank you, Jeff.
We're going to have a lot of questions. Right? I hope so. People have a lot of questions, right? Debbie.
So for Steve.
Yes.
Are we, Springfield City Utilities, building more solar farms or wind, or are we just going to buy into the other areas?
Well, I was going to talk because I think it's easier. The issue we have being a municipal utility is we get incentivized differently. We're tax exempt. And so when you start getting into these projects that have federal incentives, most of them have tax credit incentives. And that's why we don't actually buy these. We buy the power from them, because the developer, who is usually a taxable entity, like one of the wind farms is Duke Energy, actually, you know, the Duke Utilities, they can take that tax credit, that tax incentive, and use it toward their own tax liability, and it reduces our costs. If we would just go out and build it, we can't use any of the incentives because they're all some kind of a tax credit-based incentive. And so that's why with renewables, we don't build them ourselves. Now, with the particular solar project we have in the northeast part of town, we have an option to buy that after 7 years. The IRS lets you buy it after 7 years. So in 2021, we have the option to buy it, and every year thereafter we can buy it. The wind projects are not that way. They're not in town, so we never really looked at an option to buy the wind projects because we really don't want to own the wind project in Oklahoma or Kansas. We are looking at probably some expansions in the future. We have quite a bit of wind. We probably aren't looking at any more wind. We're probably looking at solar and probably some kind of solar plus storage combination and something closer to town. We got a proposal a year or so ago on a 100 megawatt solar project, and it was actually surprisingly pretty cheap. And it was within 100 miles of Springfield. And so probably we'd be looking at that.
How many homes was that, how much is 100 megawatts?
Our peak is about, well, our peak's about 700 megawatts now. So that gives you an idea. It's be about a seventh of the city during a peak day, which has actually declined. Our historical peak is 862 megawatts, I think, or 866. We hit 2011. But over the years with efficiency and more, different light bulbs, more efficient appliances, we're down to about a 700 megawatt peak. So we've declined quite a bit over time.
So, Mike, are you concerned about buying that energy if that's sustainable? I mean, are you worried about them upping the price on you all of a sudden? Here you've been counting on them?
No, we have long-term contracts, so they really can't. And just to give you the idea of pricing, the original Smoky Hills 2 that we got in 2008, that is $45 a megawatt, roughly, for power. The Frontier wind farm we got into that we thought was the best price ever was about $17 a megawatt. And that had an escalator, but a pretty small escalator. The project we just got into is $13 a megawatt. And that's flat for 20 years, so it doesn't increase for 20 years, so it's $13 a megawatt. Our coal plants run somewhere, variable cost runs somewhere between $18 and $23 a megawatt. And that's not all-in cost. That is just that's basically fuel cost, is what we consider variable cost, fuel and emissions consumables. So if you look at the all-in cost, it's about 2 to 3 times that if you look at what the actual depreciated bus bar cost is. And so that's why all of a sudden, we went from $45 megawatt power to 17, 13, and I think 13's been kind of the bottom. But solar has gone down dramatically. The Strata solar project we got into in 2014 is $85 a megawatt for power. The proposal we got last year around southwest of here, but I don't say what city, was about 20. I think it was under $30 a megawatt, in the upper 20s, somewhere in there, which for solar is down dramatically. And if you go and look, where the solar map shows better solar conditions out around New Mexico. Some of those are more like $20 a megawatt when you get out there. So it's continuing to drive efficiency. That's why I said coal's never going to come back. Whether you could say I love coal, I want to go burn coal no matter what. So that's why to me almost climate change is almost a moot point anymore because the economics are telling you to get out of that, to strive for something. You have people that have preferences to change that too. So the combination of them really doesn't matter whether you believe in climate change, whether you believe that Trump's the most wonderful thing in the world, you hate climate change. If you like money, the economics is going to tell you that coal's dead.
We have a couple questions over here.
Hey, Steve. See, you purchased some property over at Fellows Lake. Do you have any plans to do another solar farm or anything like that?
Probably not over there. We bought some property down kind of below the dam because there was a house there, and when you did the failure analysis on that dam, it wiped out that house, and so our insurance rating was higher because of that house being there. So we bought that property basically just to get rid of the house and have no one staying there because it drops our insurance rate. We probably wouldn't use that for a solar project. Probably when we're looking at our next solar project, it's going to be pretty big, and so we have to be bigger than what we probably have land available for.
I'm getting a note that we are going to ask you to use the mic, if you don't mind, only because we're recording some of these comments. So that'd be great. And we have some more questions right over here, I know.
Steve, does City Utilities support the Springfield City Council adopting the 2018 building codes in their unamended form? You know, that will make more efficient buildings, and that's going to save energy.
Well, I will address that this way. We are all for efficiency. We are usually pretty reluctant to tell the city council what they should and shouldn't support, because essentially we work for city council, and so we try and stay out of that arena. But I will tell you, we absolutely support efficiency. We have great rebate programs. We try and do everything we can do to incentivize people to be as efficient as possible. So from that standpoint, I think we definitely believe in the spirit of doing that. But for us to probably go to city council, you probably won't see that, because we just really try and not do that.
I have another question.
Sure.
But I'll take turns with. Does City Utilities still want to build a new coal ash landfill in view of the very much reduced presence of coal in your energy makeup?
If you look at that, that actually started when I was in electric supply, because at that time we looked at like we were going to continue to run those units for many, many, many years. We were going to continue to ramp up production, and it really showed the need being there. If you go back and look at the analysis right now, I don't think the analysis shows that the need is there for the landfill anymore, which is why you haven't really seen any more activity toward that new landfill. The concern was if we had any issues with the new regulation on the old landfill, we may have to do something with the new landfill if we couldn't use the old landfill. It appears to me that the old landfill is going to be able to continue to be used, so I think it would be difficult for us to justify building a new landfill. I just don't think we need it. And so I think what you'll continue to see is no activity on it, and they're going to continue to see what the future looks like. But we're going through our resource plan right now. We're trying to figure out what retirement dates look like on some of the coal units, and our crystal ball is not the best at that. But you know, when you start looking at any retirements are being replaced by renewables and storage. Pretty much everything we look at, or some type of quick start gas turbines, quick start units coupled with renewables and storage. But there's no, the coal units, especially Unit 1 at JTAC, it's going on 50 years old. Its life is getting pretty short, and the economic life of both of them are going to start to struggle. So I can't imagine, it's probably not money well spent to continue to mess with it.
Okay, Debbie has a question.
Both of you, this is a question for both of you. I know, Dan, I've heard you talk about storage is the big issue, that we can get the solar and all that, but storing it. And then, Steve, you kind of alluded to that too. Where are we has it come down in the last couple of years? Or is that a main issue, is storing?
Oh yeah, storage is the panacea. The technology is there now between all the wind turbines out there, and between solar panels and the land we have available and the resources we have available. We can generate enough power. The problem is we don't generate power at the same time people need it. And so you have to figure out how to store some of it. You also have to incentivize people to use it when it's available. So there's a couple pieces of that, and you'll probably try and drive people to utilize it when more of it's available, because they need less storage. But once you figure the storage, whoever figures out storage and makes it economical is going to be sitting at a beach somewhere, hopefully in Florida, not in Cape Girardeau. But they're going to be sitting on a beach somewhere, because that is the answer to all of this. And even our existing coal units, what keeps our existing coal units running right now is just congestion in our area that we've been working with Southwest Power Pool on trying to fix. Because the prices, if you go look at the prices in Oklahoma, with all the renewables that are in that wind belt, we would be challenged to run our coal units even today. But because of some congestion issues with the transmission system, we're continuing to run them to help balance some of that congestion. But there's projects being built right now that are going to help alleviate that congestion. So you're going to see some changes, assuming that the transmission system gets upgraded. But yeah, storage prices are continuing to drop. They're continuing to get, density's getting better, technology's getting better. There's a lot of motivation behind the battery companies to figure out something to do. I still think it's going to be something different than some kind of a battery. I mean, they're going to figure out some different way to store energy. You know, I just saw something the other day in Europe that they're experimenting with something that has these huge concrete blocks that at night they lift up into the air and use power to lift them up, and then during the day they drop them and generate power. And it's just, they build a tower. So at night you build a tower, and during the day you tear the tower down. At night you build the tower again. You know, it's kind of interesting, and that's complete. You know, that doesn't impact anything. It's kind of like a great big cuckoo clock. Is kind of how I've explained it to people. And there's going to be, to me, there's going to be something like that, because batteries, by the time you figure the whole life cycle of a battery, I don't know that it makes a whole lot of sense to try and put in that many batteries for that much storage to replace our generation fleet. I don't know if you have different thoughts on that.
That's smart. So you said about incentivizing use. Do you think that we will start seeing off-peak rate changes?
Oh yeah, I think you're going to. If you go back and look, actually I did one of the PURPA hearings years ago where we looked at off-peak pricing and time of use pricing. And at that time we said, well, we're an 85% coal utility, and the price of coal during the day is the price of coal at night. It's all the same, so we didn't want to do a time of use rates. Well, now with the way renewables are integrated into the market and we're less reliant on our coal units, it makes the prices between day and night are much different. I think what you're really going to see is we really want to incentivize people to plug their EVs in at night. So I think you're going to definitely see some kind of an EV time of use rate to where we can give people a break to plug in their EVs at night, because we don't want you plugging your EV in when you come home at 5 o'clock, because that causes a huge problem. So we've got to figure out a way to get you to plug them in overnight, and the way to do that is to give you a lot cheaper energy pricing overnight.
So follow up on that then, the smart meters that have been going in, that's kind of the first peg of being able to do that.
Absolutely. That was another reason we didn't do it, was we didn't have the metering. But with all with the new smart meters now, they are capable of doing all that.
So if I do my laundry at 2 a.m., I'll save money, right?
You will when we get a time of use rate.
Okay. I do it at that time now.
Yeah.
Several of us in this room are not Springfield residents, so where do the companies stand that supply the rural areas?
This supply what?
That supply the rural areas.
Yeah, you know, the co-ops have been slower to embrace renewables. They do have some renewables. They own some of their own wind farms up in the northern part of Missouri. But it seems like, and I don't, you know, I'm not any of the co-op boards or anything, and they keep us at a little bit of a distance. But from what we've seen, they're a little bit slower to try and switch over their generation fleet from coal to renewables. I think they're working on it, but I just don't think they have the same driver. And, you know, Empire, I'll tell you, the interesting thing about Empire got bought by a company called Liberty, which is owned by a parent company in Canada called Algonquin. They are huge believers in renewables. So, I mean, they are working on trying to shut down Asbury Power Station. I think they just spent $125 million upgrading Asbury, and they want to shut it down. And they're building like 600 megawatts of wind, I think, over in southwest Missouri for Empire. Yes, they've had that one too. So I would say Empire, through the Liberty parent company, is going to be very aggressive at renewables. The co-ops, you know, the co-ops are rural areas. Their politics probably drives them a little less to being accepting to renewables.
Can we hold on for just a minute? Is that okay? Isabel wants to share some things with us about the PACE program, I think, correct? And then can come back to questions. Is that okay?
Okay. Most of you know who I am. I'm a broker owner of Eagle Management at Realty One. Todd Thomas is my partner. And we're very involved on the local, state, and national level with the realtor associations, and especially locally with our multiple listing service that we call MLS. And so renewable energy products are awesome. Renewable energy is awesome. You know, there are some things that come up that we need to address and deal with. And, but, you know, being green and having efficiency products, I mean, even CU has some rebates when you put an efficiency product in your home. And so even on our multiple listing service, we have a section that's green friendly. You know, if you have 97% efficiency, HVAC and things like that. And so I was all supportive of this. And then in May of 2017, I was in Washington, D.C., and we were in a meeting, and they were talking about federal priority issues. And one of the ones that popped up was the PACE program. PACE is Property Assessed Clean Energy. And PACE is a form of financing for homeowners that say your water heater goes out and you don't have the money to replace your water heater. And so they have this program where they'll replace your water heater, they'll put it as a tax assessment on your tax bill, and then you have an annual payment that you pay on that. And so what they have found nationwide is that there's some concerns about this because there's limited consumer protections on this. And we see a lot of it in California and Florida where they have had to deal with this. Missouri has just started in the last few years of doing the PACE financing, and the way that works with the local and the counties is that they pass an ordinance on, each municipality pass an ordinance to allow that to be done in their area. And so what they've done in Missouri, they've started trying to pass state legislation to add consumer protections on PACE financing. And Representative Bruce DeGroot introduced House Bill 215 this year, which it did pass the House, but the session ends in May, so by the time they got it over to the Senate, the session ended, and Missouri is not a carryover state, so they have to start all over in January to introduce a new bill. And Senator Sandy Crawford has Senate Bill 173 that she introduced, and it did not get passed, but she'll reintroduce the bill in January. And so after I came back from Washington, D.C., and I started to research and find more information about this, I got acquainted with Leah Betts, our county collector, and she's not a realtor, she's a collector. She's just paid to, collect a tax bill. But she started seeing these issues popping up on a homeowner's tax assessment. A homeowner that their house is assessed at $32,000 and they pay $300 annually on their tax bill, all of a sudden they have $10,000 added to their tax assessment, and it bumps their payment up, like $1,000. It's just without consumer protections, homeowners are not qualified. The home is not qualified, and it creates a lot of problems. And so, like I said, in the new year, Senator Crawford and Representative DeGroot will reintroduce their bills to pass legislation. In the meantime, in Greene County, I believe it was August 22nd that the Greene County rescinded their contract with PACE. And then following that, September 26th, or no, 23rd. But anyway, the city of Springfield rescinded their contract with PACE. And so energy efficiency products are a great thing, but not at the advantage of a homeowner. And so I hope that you pay attention to this in the following year, and with the consumer protections, I think we can make this good.
I want to add something to this. Okay, so yes, Greene County and City of Springfield did rescind the PACE contract. City has, it looks like they will make a new contract with commercial PACE. And really, it's not a bad thing. The commercial PACE is a good product. It has good protections. And we are not, the National Association of Realtors, Missouri Association of Realtors, are not against PACE. We're for consumer protection, and we want to have the same types of protection on the residential side as is on the commercial side. Our great hope is that with Greene County and Springfield rescinding, and also a county in northern Missouri looking at rescinding the PACE product, it will help drive everybody back to the table so we can get those protections. And another thing is the city of Springfield did a study through the environmental services, and it really showed that the benefits that were touted by the different PACE providers of really did not quite work as well here. They showed that it took 225 years for the savings of a furnace to actually kick in, and it took 53 and a half years for solar panels to kick in, well beyond the life expectancy of either of those products. So those are the things that we're trying to, and all Missourians should be concerned with, is to make sure that people aren't taken advantage of. Some of the, not the company that was working here, but one of the companies that is working in one of the other larger cities had federal investigations on some fraud. Some of those have been dropped and been shown that it was on the contractors, but those, we're looking for consumer protection. We're not against clean energy. We're not against the PACE concept. We're just not for how it's working at this time.
I know some more people have questions, but we need to wrap up the formal part of this meeting. But if it's okay, if the two of you would mind staying, if people do have questions, I know this has been fascinating. Dan, I'd love to get your tips on you talked about, just doing little things. We need to make a start. But maybe you can give us, your top 10 things that we could really do to make a difference. Turn down the air conditioning. Turn it off, I mean to say. Anyway, Steve and Dan, thank you so much for being here. This has been wonderful.